Hallo, hallo. Wunderbar.
Well, perfectly. Welcome, please enter the room. Let's get started. I'll have to speak very fast. The longer we take, the faster I'll have to do. I think nobody listened. Well, I'm happy that you've already arrived. I'm glad to welcome you on the Munich Peace Conference 2024. See anything like it, that's normal. We have an incredibly packed and exciting program, no time to lose, so I'll start by rattling off a few organizational notes, followed by a few words of thanks and by a thematic introduction. My name is Julia Mühlfelder. I'm an active member of the supporting organization for the Munich Peace Conference and represent the Helmut Schulenburg, and I'm active in the German Peace Society United Opponents. There's not so much to say about me. Some may know me from some vigils and demonstrations. And two brief warnings on my person. I have a right-left bias, not in the political sense, but in the sense of orientation, and I'd like to confuse the word peace conference and security conference. So when I occasionally praise the Security Conference for its contribution to world peace, I may not really mean it, and I may not be the only one. Organizational matters. Our program is in German and English. We have two great simultaneous interpreters who will translate the whole event in both directions in the backstage area. There are headsets at the back for anyone who needs translation. Back to German. There is an attendance list at the entrance. Please sign it during the break or at the end of the event. This is important for us and our supporters from the Kurt Eisner Association. There will be video recording of the stage. We are streaming live on YouTube. A warm welcome to the people joining us on YouTube. For anybody who doesn't want to be in YouTube, please try not to be on or near the stage, otherwise I'll invite you. Our weekend program, so you know what to expect. Tomorrow morning between 10 and 12 there will be 3 peace conference workshops at the University of Philosophy. One on nuclear weapons, one on conscientious objection, and one on the peace movement and the demarcation from the right. Afterwards, the anti-risk demonstration at Stachus from PM is highly recommended. From 5 p.m. onwards, admission is open for tomorrow's evening event of the Peace Conference, starting at 6 o'clock. And
In der Kasse besorgen würde ich empfehlen, weil ich glaube, die sind wahrscheinlich auch heiß begehrt. Sonntagvormittag zwischen 10 und 13 Uhr ist die Veranstaltung Wege zum Frieden in Israel und Palästina wieder.
And again with the Combatants for Peace in the One World House. This will be followed at 5 o'clock by a review of the Munich Security Conference. And this time I'm really talking about the Security Conference by the observers Ralf Becker, Matthias Limmer from the project group Munich, Changing Munich Security Conference. The prayer for a peace of the regions will take place there immediately afterwards at 6 p.m. And this is the end of our program. Well, so much on the organizational side. Well, I've got a dry throat, but, well, the acknowledgements. I would like to thank our team servers from Order Concept, Lamipel and Lucia from the Freiheitshalle. Thank you to all of you and all those contributing to a successful conference. Thank you. The applause is really kind, but I've got 30 points and you won't be able to keep that up. I would like to thank our interpreters, Christina Breit and Sabine Ismanet. Thank you very much. And thank you to all our helpers, to the relatives of Ulla Klotz, and you have a lot of people who are helping us today. And I would like to thank all the people contributing in our organization committee, and you can shake their hands. Rachel Hoffmann, Dr. Hildegard Fischer, Rachel Hoffmann, Christoph von Lieven from Greenpeace. Unfortunately, he couldn't come today. And Greenpeace has withdrawn from the organization committee. Matthias Linnemann from the project group Changing Munich Security Conference. No, he is at the security conference as an observer. Ulla Klotz from the Peace Tech Network. And Heidi Meinzold is here. Heinz Staudacher from Natural Scientist Initiative. I would also express my thanks to Tommy Riddle, although he theoretically no longer is participating in the organization team. But we simply cannot survive without him. This is why we always involve him in our comments. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Maria Feckel, our project manager, who really works day and night, and without her we wouldn't have been able to create this conference. I'm not exaggeration if I say day and night. Thank you so much. Without you, this conference wouldn't be what it is. Thank you very much to our sponsors. I would like to, our sponsors, all the Department of Culture and some councillors from the party SPD and the Green and Rosa Liste, who have brought us a lot of publicity. There would be a lot to say about the city of Munich's refusal to sponsor this year's peace conference, but I really don't have the time. Maybe we'll get to that later. I would really like to thank the Kurt Eisner Association and the Bertha von Suttner Foundation for sponsoring despite all adversity. Thanks a lot. And a huge thank you to all the generous donors and lenders who've already made up for a good portion of the lost funding. Thank you very much. A big applause for these people. Unfortunately, we're still missing huge amounts of money to really cover the costs of this peace conference. Therefore, we are asking for further donations to save this year's peace conference and perhaps make a peace conference possible in the future. You can make donations on peaceconference.info or peaceconference.org. In this context, we'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our supporters from the Peace Conference Honorary Board who've put a good word for us. That's Professor Hanne-Margret Birkenbach, Dr. Angelika Clausen, Sue Dürr, Dr. Clemens Ronnefeld, and Dr. Hans-Christoph von Sponeck. Thanks a lot. I would also like to thank Mr. Lance Limmer, the political scientist and retained program director of the Munich Adult Education Center, who wrote a wonderful letter in support of the peace conference to Munich's Lord Mayor Dieter Reiter, which you can read at peaceconference.info. And he's here. Well, let's give him a warm applause. Thank you so much. We'd also like to thank the city councillors, that's the last one now, who submitted a motion to continue supporting the peace conference. This is Brigitte Wolf, Marie Bruneleit, Stefan Jagel and Thomas Lechner. And now I would like to mention our claim of being politically independent. We've got two people here candidating for the European Parliament, Clare Daly. But as you are cannot be elected here in Germany, this is not very important. In the case of Mr. von Schulenburg, we were not aware, but when we invited you, you were not aware of this. This was only decided a few weeks ago. But we agreed, and it's no problem, that they will not use this event for, as an election campaign. Short introduction, and I would like to pass the word then. Where is Europe driven? That's the title of today's event. Here we should take the passive and the active meaning. Europe is being pushed and Europe is moving ahead. We're talking about the future here. What do we mean saying Europe? We left this open for various approaches trying to answer this question. Are we talking about Europe? Are we talking of the OSCE? In the past few weeks, I was so involved in the organization of the peace conference that I didn't have any time to watch any news. I'm completely unaware of what was happening and has been happening in the world, and I found it very difficult to make this introduction. My partner told me that there's talk of the European Union getting nuclear weapons. And I thought, what a most crazy idea. Then I thought, well, that's fantastic. My introduction is self-written. Well, Europe, following the Second World War, especially the European Union and its predecessors, generally are seen as a peace project. The European Union, in 2012, European Union was awarded the Peace Nobel Prizes, no matter what this prize means nowadays. If Europe has ever been a peace project, always with a view to the inside. If we have an outside look at European peripherals, we see only death, violence, and hate. There may be two interpretations. First of all, pure coincidence. Second, it may be that Europe stops worldwide violence at its borders. Or third, Europe is not a peace project, but exports and outsources death, violence, and destruction on a large scale. Some at the moment supports the third theory. Now, we should ask, should we make it official by saying Europe is not a peace project by equipping Europe with internationally disrespected weapons of mass destruction? Or do we support Europe for the peace project? And now I'm almost coming to an end, thanks God. Just on our today's time schedule, we're going to hear a very nice song. And it's been written especially for today. It's called The Church. And please listen to the lyrics. They are really great. Then we will get some words from Perth Circle from Palestine. And we will hear the presentations by Olga Karach and Michael von Schulenburg. And we will have more music, Clare Daly. And then we will finish at 10 o'clock p.m. Well, let's listen to the band, the Neue Rosenheimer.
Ja, Fairness halber würde ich gerne ein paar Wörter erklären, die jetzt in unserem Lied vorkommen. Wir singen auf Bayerisch. Ich glaube, da haben nicht ganz so viele Leute jetzt eine Chance, dass sie den Text verstehen, habe ich das Gefühl. Gut, ich würde gerne 3 Wörter erklären. Ich glaube, mit denen 3 Wörtern versteht man das Lied. Das eine ist der Schorsch. Schorsch ist in Bayern die Abkürzung oder der Kosename für Georg. Das ist dann einfach der Schorsch. Dann kommt das Wort Quar vor. Quar ist das bayerische Wort für Gewehr. Und das dritte Wort, das ich einfach, glaube ich, weil es vorhin beim Soundcheck zu einer Diskussion geführt hat, also es kommt nur das Wort Hax vor. Das Wort Hax ist in Bayern, also der Hax ist der Fuß, aber der Fuß geht in Bayern von da bis ganz runter. Und unser Lied ist ein Stück gegen das Vergessen. Der Schorsch, der wollt den Krieg ziehen, geh für sein Vaterland, ausstaffiert mit Waffen, Vision und neuem Gewand. Seiner Frau, der war nicht wohl dabei, seine Kinder, die haben gerät. Kein Mensch hat genau gewusst, ob wiederkommen wird. Doch er wollte tapfer kämpfen für sein Vaterland. in seiner neuen Uniform im Quar in der Hand. Er hat tapfer an der Front kämpft, tagelang im Schützengraben. Er hat gehungert, er hat gefroren, egal wo sie eingesetzt haben. Sei Frau, die hat ihn gescheit vermisst, aber zurückkommt war nicht gewiss. Die Kinder haben vergessen, wie er ausschaut, wie er ist. Doch er wollte tapfer kämpfen für sein Vaterland. In seiner Fashion-Uniform mit'm Quar in der Hand. Leutnant ernannt und seine Frau, die war daheim. Oft hat sie nicht mal Brot, allein mit den 4 Kindern, verzweifelt und in Not. Und er ist langsam skeptisch geworden, ist es no mein Land? In seiner Fashion-Uniform im Quar in der Hand. Und ein Feut sei ganzer Trupp in am Hinterheut. An der Grenze zu Belgien, es war im Hürtgenwald. Sei Kompanie haben's aufgabert, überlebt hat nur er. Mit ner Kugel in seinem Hax und nur durch sein Gewehr. Im Lazarett ist er zum Denker gekommen, es war an der Zeit. An Krieg den wollt er nimmer haben, nicht für all das Leid. Der Schorsch, der hat's erlebt und nie drüber geredet. Die Beutel waren ein Leben lang da, vor allem nachts im Bett. Nie wieder Krieg, das ist für mich ganz klar. Ja, das weiß ich ganz genau, weil der Schorsch mein Opa war.
Hört man mich?
Can you hear me? Thank you very much to the band, our neue Rosen, a very moving song. I'm quite emotional and nervous today, but thank you so much.
Here a live video address from Robbie Damelin and Bassam Arimin of the Parents Circle Family Forum. The Parents Circle is an Israeli-Palestinian organization for people who lost immediate family members due to the conflict and the wars in Israel and Palestine. They are also known as Israeli-Palestinian Bereaved Families for Reconciliation and Peace, which tells you exactly what they're about. I talked to Robbie and Bassam yesterday, and Robbie told me that tragically they have already gained new members since 7th of October last year. The suffering this current war is bringing is truly immeasurable. Robbie and Bassam both have incredibly sad and moving personal histories. I cannot do them justice in a couple of minutes, so I will leave it up to them whether they want to talk about it if they feel inclined to do so. We came up with the theme and the program for this year's conference way before 7th of October last year. In the aftermath, we thought of changing it to address the war in Israel and Palestine. But then, why wouldn't we address the war in Sudan or any other number of conflicts and humanitarian catastrophes around the world? In the end, we settled for this live video address from Robbie and Bassam because German and European public discourse is really defined by the response to the war in Israel and Palestine right now. And too often that discourse is not guided by compassion and reconciliation, but by hatred and aggression. In their activism, Robbie and Bassam offer an antidote to these feelings. If you'd like to hear more from them, soon there's going to be a Georgetown University online module in cooperation with Parents Circle. Bassam, if you can hopefully hear me, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting us, because we have a time, so we need to start directly. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So in fact, I joined the Parents Circle Families Forum in the 16th of January 2007 after I lost my 10 years old daughter Abir to an Israeli border police. Before that, I was one of the co-founders of a group called Combatants for Peace back in 2005. We find the answer that both of us have the right to exist and no one will disappear. Briefly, we need to sit down and talk. We need to share this land as one state or two states or 5 states. Otherwise, we will share the same piece of land as 2 big graves to our kids, our families, and our people. The Israelis and the world need to recognize the legitimate rights for the Palestinians in self-determination and recognize the Palestinian state. As long as the occupation continues, unfortunately, we will continue to sacrifice the blood of our kids from both sides. The conflict didn't start on the 7th of October and didn't end on the 8th of October. We are talking about mass killing, about massacres without any mercy. And the world, especially the politicians, take sides. I believe that the world have a moral authority and moral and historical obligation to raise up their voice for justice, for peace, for democracy, for humanity, to everyone, to the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I believe we, Israelis and Palestinians, we need to release ourselves from the victimhood mentality in both sides. And I would like to ask Europe to release yourself from the guilt mentality, which prevent you to take a moral side against the occupation and the oppression. It's the opposite. We can see the people around the world, they raise up their voice for ceasefire. And this is what we need now. We are dying, we are suffering every day, but the solution is to encourage us to sit down and make peace. Israel tried to make peace with the rest of the world, many Arab states, with the United States, with Canada, with Australia, with the Emirates, with Jordan, with Egypt, but they don't have peace because they didn't make peace with the Palestinians. We are the only part can guarantee the Israeli security if we feel security. And always I remember that no people can occupy another people and feel free. Both of us, me and Robbie, and thousands of Israelis and Palestinians, I believe we are victims to this occupation. If there is no occupation, we don't need to kill each other, and we don't need to fight each other. For that, we come together to raise up our voice and to say, no more blood. This is evidence that we can live together, all side by side. Well, unfortunately, as I said, we will continue to sacrifice the blood of our kids. The war will end in one day, and the leaders will shake hands. And the people who remain, it's people like us, who paid the highest price possible, who lost their beloved ones. And the last thing I want to say, like what Mahmoud Darwish says, our national poet, late national poet, she says, when we are going to meet, and I say, after a year and a war. She says, when does the war end? I said, the time we meet. So it's the time to meet and to end this war and start to recognize the humanity in each other and to see each other as human beings. Thank you very much for listening.
Topic of your conference. However, one of the saddest things is that you've forgotten about the Ukraine, and Israel is now on Broadway. I joined the Parent Circle after my son was killed by a Palestinian sniper. And the first thing I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child. I think that's the theme of what the rest of my life meant. I think what is very important for us to notice is that you have imported our conflict into your country, and this is happening all over the world. I have been traveling in America and in England since October 7, and I can tell you that what has happened is the importation of our conflict, which creates hatred between Jews and Muslims. The anti-Semitism and Islamophobia is a disgrace. And I think that what should be happening is that you should begin to understand why a young man who lives in Gaza of 14 years old, and every 2 years there's a war, and he doesn't have a shelter, and he doesn't have where to run, and he doesn't have freedom of movement, and he doesn't have hope. So what kind of an adult do you expect to grow out of that? And then you look at the children who live on the kibbutzim on the border of Gaza, and you wonder to yourself, they thought they were invincible. But look what has happened, and what are they going to be carrying, what trauma for the rest of their lives. And so I wish that Europe and the rest of the world would suddenly start to understand what this is all about and stop being major experts on the Middle East. Perhaps you could tell the story of humanity, of what is happening in Gaza now, of the women and children who are suffering from this madness, of the hostages that haven't come home. Think about that. Think of the human part of the story and think that it is time that Israel and Palestine will sit down. We have to talk to enemies, not friends. But you can be a part of that, or you can sit back and become experts on everything, and you will not help us. If you cannot be part of the solution, I would ask you to please leave us alone. Thank you.
Robbie und Bassam, ganz vielen lieben Dank, dass Sie heute bei uns sind. Ich würde mir so sehr wünschen, dass wir für Sie mehr Zeit mit Ihnen verbringen könnten. Ich wünsche Ihnen das Beste für Ihre Suche nach Frieden und Versöhnung. Vielen, vielen Dank. Danke.
Vielen Dank. Unser erster Sprecher, unsere erste Sprecherin heute Abend ist Olga Karach. Sie ist eine
Belarussische Journalistin und Friedensaktivist.
Who leads the non-governmental organization Nasz Dom, which translates to Our House. Nasz Dom aims to promote human rights and civil liberties under the repressive regime of Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus, as well as abroad. One essential human right that Nasz Dom aims to defend is, of course, the right to conscientious objection to military service. For this, they started the campaign No Means No. Olga herself is threatened in her liberties and human rights. She lives in Lithuania, where she sought refuge in 2020. The Lithuanian government has accused her of working with Russian intelligence, which is difficult to believe given the line of work she's in. As a result, her future right of residence in Lithuania is in question. Despite these difficult circumstances, Olga continues her work, which has been awarded multiple times. In 2007, the Belarusian group of Amnesty International named her Human Rights Defender of the Year. In 2010, Radebeul Courage Prize in Germany was awarded to her. In 2019, the International Bremen Peace Prize. In 2022, the Weimar Human Rights Award. 2023, the Sean McBride Prize, and 2024, the Alexander Langer Prize. Moreover, she was recently nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Olga will speak tonight about militarization in Europe and those who oppose it, conscientious objectors and deserters. The stage is yours. You may come up to the podium or stay seated as you like.
we are living in a very strange situation right now. Everyone talks about peace and security, but in reality, there is less and less peace and security today. Everyone talks about women's rights and feminism and how important it is to involve women in peace-building process. But in fact, women are extremely excluded from the process. Everyone talks about environmental issues and climate change, but there is less and less real action on climate and environmental protection. Talking about peace and discussion peace issues has become toxic, and peace builders are being attacked and falsely accused. Conferences are cancelled or under the threat to be cancelled, stripped of funding or venue. We have to protect already those activists who is in Germany, Austria, and Western countries. What is about us from Eastern Europe? I am very confusing because now I feel like I am in Belarus, or the whole Europe has become one big Belarus, somewhere more, somewhere less. What the hell is going on? Russian politician Alexei Navalny was murdered in a Russian prison today. There is a lot of reactions in the press today, statements, call for sanctions and loud speeches of different politicians. But how many more invisible political prisoners in Belarus and Russia will die in prison just because no one is working on the prevention of any political crisis in these countries and other countries too? All diplomatic work, as I had yesterday from the Minister of Lithuania, Landsbergis, has been reduced to saying that we are ready for the war. I always hear everywhere that we are ready for the war and for the next war. And this is what I hear all the time, I want to repeat. But I don't hear what I want to hear much more. We are ready for peace. Nobody speaks about. And what is even worse, that not one of us who is speaking about that they are ready for the war, they are not ready for peace. We cannot even imagine peace after the war in Ukraine. Western countries has become afraid of discussions, and this is what Alexander Lukashenko just built his power from, the willingness of people to live under censorship and within society without any discussions. When the war was started, I went around all the Lithuanian and Polish politicians and begging them, please help Belarusian and Russian conscientious objectors. Please help Belarus not enter to the war. But all I had from them was that they cannot help me because among the conscientious objectors that there might be the Russian or Belarusian spies. Really? Seriously? Today, we all afraid to read all news because all we hear in the news is about the war. Who was being killed, how many are wounded, the amount of weapons arriving in Ukraine, and what is still needed. We are starting to speak in military terms and don't even notice this. When children are playing war and it's not longer seems horrifying to us. We are get to use to live under the war, and the person life costs nothing. Everything has been turned upside down. Today, those who refuse to take up arms and don't want to go to the front, conscientious objectors and deserters, has become criminals. Today, if you don't want to take arms, you are not a real man. This is something wrong with you. You must be punished. We help conscientious objectors in deserters, but it's very challenging now. They are not welcome anywhere. In Belarus, deserting is punishable by the death penalty, and refusal to join the military results in imprisonment. In 2022, around 400 men in Belarus were convicted for refusal to join the army. At present, the Belarusian police has declared approximately 5,000 Belarusian men wanted for attempting to evade military service in Russia or European Union. But no one provides protection to these individuals. No one provides protection to the Belarusian and Russian conscientious objectors. They have no legal status and don't even have humanitarian visas. On the contrary, if a man was previously in the army and did everything now in his power to avoid the future conscription, including hiding in Lithuania, he is considered as a threat of national security in Lithuania, and he is in the blacklist with a 5-year entry ban into the European Union. And very often, such men, Belarusian conscientious objectors, are deported to Belarus back to prison. We help these people, for which we ourselves face pressure and repressions. But today I want to say no to war. Helping conscientious objectors costs less than any muscles, but for some reasons no one does it. What is the war for Putin and Lukashenko not be involved in? What is the way for Putin and Lukashenko not be involved in the war without having soldiers? But they will have soldiers. They will be a result of desperation and hopelessness, as a few are helping conscientious objectors to save from the military. We want to preserve human life. The simplest approach is to ensure that those who don't want to take part in the army are not forced to do so. We have to protect their life and the life of people who can be killed. Let's help deserters and conscientious together. Let's stop the war through human and non-violent means. Let's save those who haven't been killed yet, children, women, and the elderly. Let's save them before it's too late. Let's finally talk about peace, read news about peace, and take military toys away from our children, because war is not a game, rather for children, not for adults. We need peace here and now.
Danke, Olga. Leider muss Olga sehr weit weg, keine Zeit für eine kurze Fragerunde. Dass jeder, der eine Frage hat, an Olga, der hier bitte die Hand. Es sind schon einige, bitte schnell, denn ja, dort jemand in der ersten Reihe. Sie bitte. Vielen Dank. Ich würde Sie gerne fragen, ob Sie etwas wissen über die Deserteure in der Ukraine, denn hier wir hören nur von Deserteuren in Russland, aber nicht in der Ukraine. Ja, danke für die Frage. Das ist eine sehr wichtige Frage. Tatsächlich haben alle Militärdienstverweigerer und Deserteure aus Russland und der Ukraine und Belarus dasselbe Problem. Und es gibt viele Diskussionen darüber, vor allem in den baltischen Ländern, wie man sie zurück in ihre Heimatländer schaffen kann, damit sie, um sie in den Krieg zu schicken. Also wir haben da eine Kampagne, um diesen Menschen zu helfen. Und das betrifft besonders halt die Länder Russland, die Ukraine und Belarus. Ich sehe keine weitere Frage jetzt, weil ich würde Ihnen gerne eine Frage stellen. Wie haben Sie den Mut gefunden, sich dem Regime in Belarus entgegenzustellen? Ich glaube an die Kraft, an die Macht der Menschen. Und ich denke, Demokratie kann es nur von unten geben. Und ich denke, wir können den Krieg stoppen. Und nur wir können das schaffen. Das Volk, die Menschen, Putin und Lukaschenko können den Krieg nicht fortführen, wenn die Männer, die in den Krieg beteiligt sind, die eingezogen werden. Und wenn wir ihnen helfen und nicht an dem Krieg teilnehmen, und das ist eine besonders große Herausforderung, die Infrastruktur aufzubauen, um diesen Militärdienstverweigerern und Deserteuren aus diesen 3 Ländern zu helfen. Aber ich glaube nicht, dass wir den Krieg nicht stoppen können, wenn die Menschen das nicht wollen. Ich möchte nur sagen, letztes Jahr hatten wir Feedback aus dem Publikum, dass sie viel mehr Zeit bräuchten für Fragen aus dem Publikum. Aber jetzt sehe ich kaum welche. Bitte fürchten Sie sich nicht, wenn Sie irgendwelche Fragen haben. Aha, ich sehe da jemanden hinten. Was mache ich denn?
Help.
Can you repeat that real quick?
Ich wüsste gerne, wie diese Hilfe aussieht, welche Art von Hilfe Sie diesen Menschen zur Verfügung stellen. Zuerst organisieren wir eine Hotline für Militärdienstverweigerer und überlegen, wie sie es schaffen, ihr Land zu verlassen und in die Europäische Union zu ziehen, um dort einen rechtlichen Status zu erhöhen. Wenn sie hier ankommen, dann haben besonders viele Deserteure überhaupt gar keinen rechtlichen Status und wir organisieren Unterstützungskampagnen und üben Druck auf Politiker aus, damit sie diesen Menschen einen rechtlichen Status vermitteln, wie in Deutschland und in anderen Ländern der EU. Weil zum Beispiel in Litauen ist es für diese Menschen unmöglich, irgendeinen solchen Status zu bekommen und deshalb können sie dort auch nicht bleiben. Und was auch wichtig ist die Hilfe für uns, die Verteilung von Informationen die Verbreitung von Informationen über diese Menschen und über ihre Rechte in den sozialen Netzwerken. Es gab zum Beispiel in letzter Zeit kaum Nachrichten über Belarus und schon gar nicht über die Militärdienstverweigerer. Und deshalb tun wir, was wir können, um das auch in den sozialen Medien zu verbreiten, sprechen mit Journalisten, Politikern und versuchen Menschen einzubinden, dass sie sich auch dafür einsetzen. Für diese Menschen, weil die weigern sich, einen Krieg teilzunehmen.
I've just noticed that there are many people who may not ask questions because they're afraid of speaking English, but of course your questions will be translated.
Von wie vielen Menschen sprechen wir ungefähr? Wie groß ist der Prozentsatz von Einberufen, die dann den Dienst verweigern? Und das ist eine gute Frage, aber vielleicht muss ich da ein bisschen Hintergrundinformationen bringen, denn jetzt sprechen wir über wir haben wirklich alarmierende Nachrichten, dass besonders von Seiten der russischen Propaganda, dass Belarus auch an dem Krieg teilnehmen soll. Und wir erwarten eine Massenmobilisierung von belarussischen Soldaten nach den gegenwärtigen Wahlen in Russland. Und das ist wirklich alarmierend für uns. Und wir müssen uns beeilen, diesen Prozess zu stoppen. Wenn wir über Belarus sprechen, über die Anzahl von potenziellen Militärdienstverweigerern, das sind ungefähr 10.000 Menschen. Das reicht, um die Teilnahme der belarussischen Armee an dem Krieg zu verhindern. In Russland ist die Zahl natürlich höher. Wie groß sie wirklich ist, weiß man nicht. Aber ich schätze, dass die Menschen dort in die baltischen Länder
This is, I don't know, maybe 100,000 people, something like that. About Ukrainians, unfortunately, I have no information, but I know that in Germany you have already 200,000 men who doesn't want to participate in the war. So this is, by my opinion, of course, on one hand, this is huge number of people. On the other hand, if you compare with, for example, Poland accepted 4 million Ukrainian refugees. So if this is the price to stop the war and have huge impact for the war, we have to do it.
Okay. Olga, thank you.
Vielen Dank.
You have to leave us now. For those of you who have more questions for Olga, who are really invested in the topic of conscientious objectors and deserters, Olga is leading a workshop tomorrow morning from 10 to 12 at the Hochschule für Philosophie. Please come and speak to her there. For now, have a good night, Olga, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Yes.
Now I'd like to switch back to German. Michael von der Schulenburg.
Geht dort hinauf, weil lieber dort sprechen möchte.
You will know Michael from his speeches given at the big peace demonstrations in Berlin, which have taken place ever since the war in Ukraine started. But he has a long history. And Michael von der Schulenburg is former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. In 1996, he had to leave the GDR, studied and worked in Berlin, and has been living and working in several peace missions of the United Nations. He was in many countries who suffered from violent conflicts. Since 1992, he was in a leading function of these peace missions. He had deployments in Haiti, Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, in Syria, in Somalia, on the Balkan region, and in Central Asia. Since his retirement, Michael has given many presentations on reform of the UN, on the wars on Afghanistan and Ukraine. In 2017, he published his book on building peace, rescuing and saving the United Nations. And now he is a partyless candidate for the European Parliament, and we will simply pretend that this has not happened. Does it work? I prefer to stand when I talk because I have to look up. I don't want to give you an arrogant impression to talk top down. My task here is to give you information on the war in Ukraine and our obligation to peace. This is not possible at the moment, and I will explain why. I will talk about two things. On one hand, on what's happening on an international level, on the other hand, what's happening in the war in Ukraine. We cannot understand the war in Ukraine if we do not understand the international background. You know, I'm in an age when I clearly remember the fall of the Berlin Wall as a German, and at that time I was in Kabul. And we had in 1992 we had the feeling that the decay of those two blocks of power would bring us peace. Now, 30 or 33 later, we find ourselves in an even more dangerous situation than during the Cold War period. I'm trying to give you a sober image of that. Wars always start in the heads of people. For this reason, it's very interesting to watch the language. If we now could have a live stream of the Munich Security Conference, they think that is war, but that's not true. And we would always find the word person, a certain combination. You talk of violence instead of diplomacy. You talk of armament instead of detention. You demonize the other side instead of understanding it. And that's war, not peace. And it's always war, not peace, that dominates the discussions. I have seen so many wars, but believe me, war always starts in the minds of people. If they only see the other side as the enemy, as the evil, that only violence can solve problems, that's always a very personal impression. If people feel that they need weapons, that they need to defend themselves, then we will see war instead of peace. In 2022, the United Nations Organization was the year where we saw most wars and the most brutal wars ever since the end of World War II. This means we're in a situation where this is not only in the heads of people, but where it's happening in reality. We see war everywhere. We were not able to find a diplomatic solution, be it in Sudan or be it in Gaza or in Ukraine. No matter where we go, we are so fixed on the idea of being able to solve conflicts with weapons. Statistics by the US Congress, and I'm talking of the US Congress, not by an enemy, that between 1992 and 1921, the USA was involved in 250 times in other countries, or intervened, as we say. And this does not even include the CIA operations. They have their own army. That's a completely different part of the story. This doesn't, we're talking about wars as we see in Ukraine and Yemen. This means we've arrived in a world where we had hoped and thought we had peace, and which had developed in a completely different direction. I don't know if anybody has a good explanation for that. Another aspect is, today we need to say there is a real collapse of international law. International law was built on the UN Charter following the impression of the two world wars. If we have a look at documents written in Germany, and when von der Leyen talked about the security of the German army, in this document the UN Charter wasn't even mentioned. It's a new order, and nobody can tell me who defines the laws. International law, which we set up, must govern. It must be built on the UN Charter. A charter that said no, never ever war again, by setting up certain rules of the behavior between cities. Today we would no longer be in a position to pass such a law or such a document. If I would really recommend you to read this document. It has determined all my life on all the missions. It will move you. The language used there, following the experience of two world wars, governed a completely different. It said, yes, there will be conflicts about borders, about economic issues, but we don't have to resort to weapons. We want to talk about it. We want to negotiate. Who enters into negotiations? This has disappeared. But there is another aspect, and I'd like to look that up because I'm not that good. If we see modern weapon technology, modern weapon systems, they surpass everything we had during the Cold War era. Nowadays, you talk of intelligent nuclear weapons. And we heard that Russia could send nuclear weapons from the world, and we have cyber wars, paper wars, robot wars, and the neutron bomb, quantum technology. I take this from a report. I don't really understand the details. I think, no, it's so difficult for normal people to understand it, but there's one big question. With all those hypersonic missile systems, we can reduce our response time. Then we have stealth technology. We won't even know that somebody's approaching before the bomb has been fired. This will reduce the response time, and with this reduced response time, we have a chance that the other side shoots before something has happened, just to make sure. We're getting into an incredibly dangerous situation. and we have artificial intelligence, and we cannot make these fast decisions. This is why we resort to artificial intelligence, and we will have more and more weapon systems that can no longer be controlled by human beings. This is an incredibly dangerous situation. At the same time, all checks and balances on armament and trust-building measures have been superseded. At that time, Bush decided, be it Sky IBN, and reduction of troops in Europe. There's nothing like that anymore. No trust-building measures, no confidence-building measures. And this is a situation where we do not need to have any ideological thoughts. We have created a situation where we do not have any humanitarian law, UN Charter, no human rights, no arms control, and no confidence-building measures. We've a world which we haven't seen during the Cold War period. We have always talked. I find it very, very hard to understand how this could happen, but that's a fact. Let me say a few words on Ukraine. If there ever had been a war that could have been prevented, then it's the war in Ukraine. If we see the call in the UN Charter to talk about the problems until we find a solution, we would never ever have seen war. Of course, we all say, yes, it was a Russian attack. That's true. Yes, that's a violation of the UN Charter. But this is only one part of the violation of the UN Charter. If one side of the conflict parties refuses to negotiate, and there has been enough time to negotiate, already in 1997, Yeltsin told the American president, at least the Americans, Belarus is a red line, and in diplomatic language, a red line means that we will take any measures to prevent that. There is no discussion. They simply ignored him, and Putin tried it when he talked to German Parliament in 27, 28, all the protests. We knew that there would be war in Ukraine. In October 21, a few months before the war started, the USA entered into a strategic partnership and signed this treaty. And if you read the text, I did, it's almost like the preparation for war. They were prepared that this would happen, and they really thought that they would win. When the war started, and I was involved because I consulted the negotiators in an outline for a treaty was passed in Istanbul with 10 points. It was really a mastership of Ukrainian diplomacy. We have never seen a comparable example since there has been, that to reach an accord, and that the one who was attacked should not lose any territory. No territory was handed over. The areas of Donbass and Crimea should be solved, but they did not surrender any territory. These things are called suggestions, and it even said that Russia would take efforts and we stopped this war, this treaty. In March, on the 24th March, Biden went to Europe and there was a NATO summit. And if you read the declaration, we will not negotiate with Russia as long as they will not completely withdraw from this territory. And the accord had a withdrawal there, but it became clear that there was no will for negotiation. And it was said that it was a good compromise, and Johnson said on the 7th of April, if you do that, you will have no support from the West. They really blackmailed the poor man. The whole talk, and I really do not sympathize with the Russian attack, but a large amount of the responsibility for that, for the enormous amount of people killed, for this enormous destruction, also goes to the West. The argument, yeah, but they attacked the country and it's the Ukraine's right for self-defense. No question, that's what it's in the Charter. But how could we get so far that the right for self-defense is turned into a right for self-destruction? Because all the weapons we are sending, and of course we see the Crimea, they all were there. And the destruction in eastern Ukraine is bigger than in the part controlled by the government. We don't know what's going on, we don't see any pictures, but our rockets land somewhere and destroy something and they kill people. And still we go on. Today we see a situation, I'm in contact with Ukrainian people, we have a certain new thinking, there will be a new offensive, and the commander said it will only be defense. Whatever it is, they want 500,000 more young people in the army, and they're just passing a law in parliament, and more people will be sacrificed to a cause that cannot bring them anywhere. Everybody knows that Ukraine won't be able to win this war. And every day we do not negotiate, the situation in Ukraine will get worse. Even in Ukraine, you will see decay. They are no longer in a position to enter into negotiations. Ukraine needs a ceasefire, and it needs a peace accord. That's the last point I'd love to make. We're all Europeans here. Europe is not asked about this war. When Putin sent out his suggestions for a peace agreement, he did not send it to the European Union. And again, 4 days ago, Putin made an offer, not he himself, he did it via Arabian countries, for a ceasefire, would have been very advantageous for Ukraine. But who does he contact? The Americans? Europe? No. But it's a war on European ground. We will have to pay the bill for that. And it's a country that's losing its population. We've never seen this before, and you need to accept it. And Zelensky said he cannot pay for his pensioners because they don't have any money. 1/3 of the population are pensioners in Ukraine. First, they had a high growth, and all young people either had to go to war or ran away. It's now a state of pensioners, and just think to send 500,000 more people to the border. It's irresponsible. And at the moment, I do not see even a starting point in any of the European states or in the European Union who are thinking of how we can get back to peace. And I've very, very often done this. And I've made the experience that most wars do not end with peace, they end with a ceasefire. This border will never, ever be stable. Europe needs peace, and we need it more urgently than Russia. We're living in a bubble. And I know the international situation more than Germany. The complete global south does not support us. We had, votes where the Americans are the only ones who support us. And even the British disagree, and it's very often very, very small states with a very low population. This is a very, very dangerous situation for Europe. We cannot afford to affront all people, and we should not forget that nations like India and China are on the same side. Both do not want an expansion of NATO to Asia. Nobody wants NATO in Ukraine. Nobody wants an American sea in the Black Sea. They feel surrounded. If we Europeans do not understand that and stick to our ideologies with imperialism and Katharina, and she was German. And all the propaganda doesn't give any importance to the fact whether something is correct or incorrect. One more thing, you give me this look to stop now. I don't have any real notes. Let me emphasize again, a peace movement must must rely on the UN Charter, human rights, must defend human rights. The sad thing about our situation is that the Americans brought this to us. Without Roosevelt and his wife, we would never have seen it. And now they're ones that destroy all those things. They played such an important historic role to give this to us. It was the Americans who promoted this charter. We cannot only talk about peace. There are so many accords and treaties. No war again and humanity are the core issues that say everything, no matter whether you speak of the environment, of development policies. Have a look at the language where 193 agreed upon. And still we are in the most dangerous situation we've ever faced on our planet. Thank you very much. Would you like to take a few questions? I'll answer from there. Thank you very much, Michael, for your speech. I would like to contradict you at least in 2 points. First of all, because it's important, and second, because I'm enjoying it. And you said that we bear a large part of the responsibility. In my position as a pacifist, I would like to contradict the organization who takes up the weapons and starts the fight, bears the biggest share of the responsibility, even if I agree to the previous situation. We can discuss this. Just a moment, we'll come to the questions. The second point is the depopulation of Ukraine. Maybe I misunderstood you, but I would think of other examples of depopulation due to war, conflict. Would you like to answer me, or shall we collect questions from the audience? It's absolutely clear. Russia's attack upon the Ukraine is illegal. But why is it illegal? We do not say that due to the UN Charter, otherwise it would not be illegal. In the past, fair or unfair wars, this differentiation was abolished by the UN Charter. Every attack is forbidden by the UN Charter. Of course, we see a very, very long process of reducing the maneuvers in the Black Sea. And if sleepwalkers, you see how difficult it is to find who actually started the war. There won't be the war. There won't be an easy solution to that. It's not the most important question. Yeah, I'll tell you why. If we have we have negotiations on ceasefire, never ever who started plays a role. Two factors. Usually it's important to see what's the military situation, and that's unfavorable, at least for the Ukraine, and what are the real targets on both sides. And the second target is very, very difficult. It's so difficult to find out what did the parties want with this war. Think of Clark. It's difficult to find out what people wanted in World War I. By seeing an outline of the Accord for Peace, and it was territory integrity. And today this is no longer possible. We have to assess what does spirit really want, and we do not can start with ideology. We have to be very, very realistic. All wars are immoral, and even the peace accords are based on national or on the interest of groups. That's just a fact. This war won't be different from any other war. We had some opposition. I've got 3 here. Let's collect a few 3 questions, and over to you. 2 questions, both concerning Germany. At the moment, we're reading that the German Chancellor Scholz wants a support accord with Ukraine and France. How do you see the effects of these accords? Do they also, how far will the obligation to give Ukraine military support in such an agreement? The second question is, if we hear German politicians talk, they always say, pretend that Europe is looking for Germany to take a leadership role. And I'm thinking of the strategy that Germany should become a hegemonial power in Europe and thus be a true partner of the USA and guarantee American leadership. I've got 3. I don't know how you want to organize. I contradicted because I'm not sure that I understood you correctly. Germany supplies weapons. This means we are responsible. And one of the things I would have wanted to know, Mr. von der Schulenburg, you talk of the important time in January to March 22. we didn't have a lot of news in German press that negotiations have already reached such a point. How can you explain that this was not in German media, that nobody mentioned how close we got to a solution of the conflict? I have read the text of the UN Charter several times, and this text really inspires me. And I would like to have a perspective in the future. And I'm always waiting for the General Secretary of the United Nations, and I always ask myself, when and where are you? Which initiatives will you take if we have this wonderful charter? And I really miss the UN to stand up, and I want to take a look into the future. What are our perspectives? We have the Security Council. As a long-year UN diplomat, where do you see a perspective pointing to measures taken by the UN? Well, with the depopulation, I think if you see such a big country and we see an enormous reduction, it's considerable. I think I don't know if the Khmer Rouge did a thing, but we shouldn't forget Ukraine is a neighbor country. We're in Europe. There are wonderful people. And it's shocking that this happens to fellow Europeans 30 years after the end of the Cold War. This should never have been permitted to happen. Now, may I ask you about the talk? I think these are ways to get around, as people know that it won't be possible to take up Ukraine and think of Cuba. There are a lot of protests against America, but they have to behave in a way that America won't attack them. If you are the neighbor of a nuclear power, this is simply realistic policies. No Frenchmen. Do you think they will supply weapons? This is a bit of show by Macron. And the role of Germany, in my opinion, as a German, I rather see us in the role to show a bit of modesty. We were the country who was responsible or shared responsibility for two world wars and attacked people who were unarmed and weren't involved at all. And the UN Charter and human rights were passed because this immediate experience of the deep fall of a civilized people during the times of Hitler's regime. My family was involved too, and it's shocking. If somebody comes and says, well, Germany is the Western world, it's the superpower idea. If Germany really was such a superpower, this would mean the end of the European Union. Poland will not permit this. The British have left, but they would complain, and the French wouldn't accept. Do you think the Italians will accept that? Germany always protested when there were thoughts of Germany becoming a member in the Security Council. My wife is from the Netherlands. There's no peace movement in the Netherlands because the Netherlands are similar to Britain. They participate in every war, just a little bit, but they participate, legal or illegal. most wars are illegal, but they still participate. And in my feeling is that they love the protection of the Americans because they're still afraid of the Germans. If you see the countries or the occupation of Iraq, who participated there, the European countries were almost all our neighbors. Poland, Czechia, Belgium, the Netherlands, even Denmark. And do you know who participated in this illegal war? Ukraine. In the start of the attack, they were the third biggest group. They withdrew after 2 years. But Ukraine, complaining about the attack now on their own, in their own country, I do not want to make a to sentence Ukraine, but that's the problem with international law at the moment. Everybody is just simply doing what he feels is right according to political considerations. And think of all the intervention of the Americans. And nobody will list one where we see a shift to more democracy, more security, rule of law. All these invaded countries ended up in chaos. They were left alone. And think of Afghanistan, think of Syria. It's not that I like Gaddafi, but what followed was much worse, and this was due to our intervention. And I'm very much afraid but I feel that Ukraine will follow this road. I'm not responsible, it's just an assessment. And I don't think that the Germans should be a leading power. I'd prefer the Irish. That's a nice, very good closing word for this round of questions. We're now going to hear one more song by the band. Oh, I've got so many questions. At least 3 here. There are so many questions, but there will be so much room. I would like to go on with our program as planned. There will be enough time. No, I just wanted to promise that you all have room for discussion, but that's something I cannot do. But I will try to pass the word to as many people as possible. Now, our next point is the band Rosenheimer, and this song is still relevant.
Dieser Song war aktuell oder brandneu, als wir das erste Mal bei dieser Veranstaltung aufgetreten sind. Jetzt nach Jahren ist er immer noch aktuell. Gerade wieder haben wir immer öfter das Bedürfnis, ihn wieder zu singen, weil es im Refrain darum geht, was bei uns gerade in Deutschland passiert und leider nicht nur in Deutschland. Und was unsere Aufforderung ist, rutscht zusammen, aber nicht nach rechts. In Deutschland wächst die Stimmung, viele sagen, wir sind doch voll. Und irgendwie weiß keiner, wie man damit umgehen soll. Drum macht's Platz in eure Kids und denkt euch in die Menschen rein. Weil zusammenhalten und zusammenwachsen wird unumgänglich sein. Drum macht's einen Platz da, wir haben doch Platz da. Geh jetzt auf Zeiten, druckt's ein Stückel los, auf gar keinen Fall nach rechts. hey, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Und klappt's mal bloß, weil was Fremdes ist doch das nicht gleich was Schlechtes, ja, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Geh geht's auf Zeiten, drückt ein Stickel bloß, auf gar keinen Fall nach rechts, hey, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Und klappt's mal bloß, weil was Fremdes ist doch das nicht gleich was Schlechtes. Jedes Jahr im Advent sagen wir der Welt, wir christlich, dass wir sind. Und jedes Jahr schauen wir mit den Kindern die Herbergsuche an. Doch wenn statt Josef und Maria bei uns der Chamido klopft, dann sagen wir, wie der Besi wird, ist alles schon voll gestopft. Hey, macht's einen Platz da, wir haben doch Platz da. Geh geht's auf Zeiten, ruckt's ein Stickel bloß, auf gar keinen Fall nach rechts, hey, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Und klappt's mal bloß, weil was Fremdes ist doch das nicht gleich was Schlechtes, ja, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben einen Platz da. Die aufgenommen hat, wie sie im Krieg vor 80 Jahren da gestanden sind in Not. Nun nicht lang her waren unsere Leid vertrieben ganze Welt. Doch wenn's einem gut geht, dann vergisst man schnell, was wirklich zählt. Drum macht's einen Platz da, wir haben einen Platz da. Geh geht's auf Zeiten, drückt ein Stickel bloß, auf gar keinen Fall nach rechts, ja, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Und klappt's mal bloß, weil was Fremdes ist doch das nicht gleich was Schlechtes, ja, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Platz, macht's doch einfach Platz, wir haben einen Platz da. Ja, macht's einen Platz da. Was er sich der Arbeit hat, sich am Weg macht in einem Viehtransport und weit eure knapp vorm Tod. Wenn der sich mit 200 Leid in einer Turnhalle einlegt, dann nicht, weil er schmarotzen will, sondern er sich nicht draus sieht. Drum macht's einen Platz da, wir haben einen Platz da. Geh geht's auf Zeiten, druckt's ein Stickel bloß, auf gar keinen Fall nach rechts, hey, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Und klappt's mal bloß, weil was Fremdes ist doch das nicht gleich was Schlechtes, ja, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Geh geht's auf Zeiten, druckt's ein Stickel bloß, auf gar keinen Fall nach rechts, ja, macht's einen Platz da. Wir haben doch Platz da. Und klappt's mal bloß, weil was Fremdes ist doch das nicht gleich was Schlechtes.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much to the new Rosenheimer. Can you hear me? Now we will have a 15 minutes break. Please return yours by 8:45. See you.
Klasse, eure neue Ergänzung.
Bill? Ich würde jetzt alle bitten, wieder die Plätze einzunehmen und die Neu-Rosenheimer spielen uns jetzt noch ein Instrumentalstück, während wir alle wieder zu den Plätzen zurückfinden und dann geht es weiter.
Ich brauche keine, die sich besetzt haben.
Ja? Gerne, einfach.
Du bleibst gemutet, oder? Ja. Wollen wir mal fragen?
Excellent timing.
Where's Michael? Michael, he'll come back, won't he?
Yeah, I'm sure he will. All right. We're back back to English now. Is everyone back in their seats? Looks like very few people, if any at all, have left, which is really good of you to stick around. Ja.
It's free.
Ja, super. Ja, ihr müsst dann auf mich zukommen und mit. Okay, eine kurze Anmerkung auch für die Leute, die live auf YouTube.
A short note to our YouTube listen, you can also ask questions. We will bring into our podium discussion. Please send us your questions.
All right. So our next speaker, Clare Daly. It's not an easy task announcing Clare Daly as a speaker. From the outside looking in, reading Wikipedia or Irish news articles, her political career looks like a string of massive controversies. Perhaps that is not surprising, given that she likes to pick a fight with some of the most powerful people on the planet, including former US President Barack Obama and the current president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. She's also not afraid of using strong language to describe these people, which I'm hoping she will refrain from using tonight, so as not to trigger a complete meltdown at the Süddeutsche Zeitung. Clare Daly is a member of the European Parliament for the Irish party Independence for Change in the left-wing GUE-NGL group. The first part of that is French, so bear with me. The Gauche Unitaire Européenne, and NGL stands for Nordic Green Left. In her native island, as well as in the European Parliament, she's known for her uncompromising criticism of the EU's militarization, asylum policy at the EU's external borders, as well as a host of other issues that pertain to human rights and international law. She has been very supportive over the last couple of weeks as we've had to deliberate cancelling the conference altogether, but fortunately we decided to go ahead as planned. Tonight she will speak, among other things, about the current militarization process of the EU. Claire, the stage is yours.
Thanks very much, Julian, and thanks to you all for being here. It's very difficult for me to have to follow the excellent speakers that we've already had, and particularly the magnificent musicians that we've been privileged to listen to. And I suppose being here, I'm very glad, a fair bit sad, and in some ways boiling mad that we have to be here. Because of course, I'm very glad. What an honour and a privilege for us to gather here with so many like-minded, genuine and committed warriors for peace. Where else would you want to be? It's sad, of course, that the reason we're here is because your city has again been taken over by the warmongers and the merchants of death who are gathered to escalate tension and division, all to benefit the pockets of the military-industrial complex. And to be honest, I'm a bit mad because against that very backdrop, just like in Vienna when the night before our venue for our peace conference was cancelled, organisers here in this city have pulled the plug on the funding for this event. That is a deliberate effort to repress and silence the peace movement. And we are here to say, shame on them. We are here in defiance. And we're here to remind them that no force on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. And our time has come. So I salute the courage and the determination of the organisers not to be cowed, because the peace movement has never been more important than it is today. Because whatever about the truth that the EU in its early days was some sort of a peace project to bring peace on a continent divided by 2 world wars. That story is certainly well over now. When the EU funnels billions of taxpayers' money to keep the war in Ukraine going and to ignore the prospect for peace, when they pump billions and millions to prevent a ceasefire in Gaza, while we know, as we are here, a genocide is being carried out. And that would not be possible without the support of the US or the EU. So I first want to start by explaining to people that you have to realise that the European Union is undergoing a massive transformation. It is literally barrelling down the road to ever greater militarisation, ever greater alignment with NATO. And this has all been driven by increasing hostility between the great powers, and the EU wants in on the act. The scale and pace of militarisation that is taking place is absolutely frightening, and it is largely taking place ignored and in silence. If you like, when you tune in to the events that happen in Brussels, people of conventional wisdom will be going around saying that actually the problem for Europe is that we're not militarist enough, that we actually have neglected our defence seemingly, that we should have militarised harder and faster years ago. And according to Joseph Borrell, we've got to learn the language of hard power. To quote him, which I find frankly shocking, he says the EU capacity has to be developed if we really want to be an actor that is capable of wielding influence on what happens in the world using instruments of coercion. That is to say, making others behave the way we want them to behave. That's hard power. We must have hard power. Now, it would take me days to outline the scale and extent of the military programmes that the EU is undertaking presently, so I'm just going to confine myself to a very few. The first one, the question of an EU army. Well, in Ireland they tell us that that's actually a conspiracy theory. There's nothing happening there at all. Don't worry about it, nothing to see here. And yet, one of the projects that the EU is presently developing is what they call a rapid deployment capacity. Well, God only knows what that is, but if you read the text, they say it's a proposal to replace the military forces and the failed battle groups concept, but it is, and again I quote them, a permanently available, standing, multinational EU force of initially 5,000 troops, including land, air, maritime components, funded from the EU budget under the full command and control of a permanently active EU headquarters, synchronised and aligned with NATO. They tell us it is available for collective defence, capable of rapidly deploying into future battlefields outside of the EU, including non-permissive environments, which Joseph Borrell tells us is boots in the ground that we are not, in countries that we are not welcome. Well, if that isn't an EU army, I'm Ursula von der Leyen. The second area that is underway is, of course, EU military missions. Now, many people don't know this, but the EU is already in the business of deploying armed forces abroad under the Common Security and Defence Policy. There's 9 military missions and 12 civilian ones, most of them in Africa and in the Sahel. They're all under an EU command structure. They talk in fluffy language about, oh, no, we're here to bring our values. We're here to help. Sure, look, we're here for a bit of peace building, a bit of capacity building, some training missions. But when you read the small print of those missions, they're all done on the basis of the EU's strategic interests. And if you look even closer, you will find that they are explicitly advancing the energy interests of countries like France or Germany in Africa, where there's a big power conflict with China, with Russia. They're all in on the act, making a mess of countries like Mali, and where the people are sick of the sight of us. And behind it all, and the engine behind it all, of course, is the big one: EU military spending. Because it's not just about armies and soldiers, it's about the industry of war. And increasingly, the EU is spending enormous amounts of money, both from our national budgets and directly from the EU budget itself, on military and defence research, on arms purchases and arms production. Now, this has been coming for a very long time. And to be honest, it is a story of brutal, naked corruption. Nothing more. Nothing more. Because 10 years ago, our lords and ladies, who are our masters and great leaders, decided to say, well, look, we have to look at how are we going to make Europe safe. And someone said, oh, I know, I have a great idea. Why don't we get together a group of experts and ask them what the solution might be? So they convened a group. They called it the Group of Personalities. And they were people like Saab, Boeing, Leonardo, Fraunhofer, and all of these organisations who were invited to advise us on how Europe might be made safer. And surprise, surprise, they said, you know what? The answer is you need a lot more militarisation. And those in power said, that's great, we'll go and work on that. We'll establish, first of all, a European Defence Fund. That fund was passed in 2021 with a budget of €8 billion. It is going up exponentially since then. And how it works is the EU hands out grants from the EU budget to arms manufacturers to go away to come up with new designs for new weapons and technologies. And then those same companies get the patent for those technologies that they developed with our money, and then they sell them back to us and we end up paying for it again. That's the scam that is unfolding before us. That's not the only one. On top of that, we've an alphabet soup of new programs for various stages, soaking up more and more money in what the Commissioner Thierry Breton calls a war economy. We have ASAP, 500 million to ramp up the production of artillery shells and missiles. EDIRPA, 300 million to finance member states buying weapons and ammunition. STEP, another 1.5 billion for the defence research. All of these straight out of the EU budget. But that's not enough. Then we have the rather Orwellian named European Peace Facility, which replaced the African Peace Facility and is a way in which they can, off the books, use money to sell European arms to African countries to go have civil wars, destabilise their areas or whatever you like. And there's been 12 billion spent on that, much of it on Ukraine. On top of that, they're pledging another 20 billion in defence for Ukraine, a country which, as Michael has said, is fast running out of personnel to use the weapons and who desperately need peace and not more war. So what we've had is 133 billion in direct expenditure in the last 2 years going to Ukraine. That has not helped a single person in Ukraine. It's gone on militarism, it's gone on just an appalling nightmare. And that isn't bad enough. You've 270 billion, which the member states are spending on defence. And I have to say, because it would be remiss of me here, I find it tragic and embarrassing that Germany is spending 300 million in exports to Israel at the same time that the International Court of Justice has said there's a plausible case of genocide to answer. I think that is utterly shameful. So the question that we all have to ask ourselves is, well, how is any of this making us safer or improving our lives? And the truth is that security as it's outlined and as it'll be expressed by our friends in the other part of this city this weekend, security in EU politics is the militarisation of peace. We see every area of civilian society this encroaching in. I'm on the Transport Committee. We see almost €2 billion being spent on what they call military mobility to facilitate the movement of military personnel and equipment all across Europe. We have, of course, as well, the tragedies of the deaths that occur on our borders. Migration is called a security issue. It gets talked about as a migration crisis in the European press and is an excuse for the defence industry to sell more equipment to militarise our society. And for me, it's beyond tragic that we see the very same companies which have profited from the destabilisation of Africa and the Middle East in their wars, the same companies benefit from the sealing of our borders when those desperate people try to reach our shores and seek sanctuary here. They're blocked by weapons and Frontex and all of the rest, with the same companies benefiting. So the truth is that the migration crisis, as they call it, in reality is a mass population displacement. The number of people displaced worldwide now stands at 110 million. 361 million people are in need of humanitarian aid. A staggering 60% of those people in countries under unilateral US and EU sanctions, on a planet with more wealth and more knowledge than in our entire history. And then, of course, we have the biggest threat to our future and our security, that of the climate crisis. A crisis which requires, in response, international cooperation in order to ensure our survival. So what do we do? Do we cooperate? Do we invest our resources in tackling the climate crisis? Do we hell? Instead, what we've seen under this presidency of the European Commission is military programmes elevated over climate programmes. And it's not just that billions of money are being spent on defence, but that expenditure and that activity is exempt from calculations when we look at the CO2 emissions. So while military emissions are more than all of the global aviation and shipping criteria together, they're exempt from any criteria in tackling climate change. That is an absolute disgrace in an era where we penalise working class people using a flight to go on a holiday to Spain or whatever. It is frankly an abomination. It is not just the fact that they are spending all this money on militarism. They are actually transferring money designated to deal with the climate crisis and rowing back on the necessary environmental commitments that were made. So the STEP programme that I mentioned earlier was supposed to be €10 billion to deal with low-carbon projects, good innovation to tackle the climate crisis. 8.5 billion has been taken out of that to go to defence. That's a fact. We hear a lot of talk about the European Union is now going to deal with the fiscal rules that restrict our budget. They're going to relax them so that governments can spend more to stimulate the economy. Originally, that money was being done in order to facilitate the development of climate-friendly projects, which are absolutely necessary. Not anymore. The fiscal rules are being relaxed for, you got it, defence expenditure yet again. And we have the European Investment Bank, which we were told was the European Green Bank, is now the European Battle Bank because their climate projects are being shelved, instead being going to defence ones. And we are here to say, as part of this event this weekend, there can be no green politics without peace. Yet the Greens in Germany, in my experience in the European Parliament, are the biggest war hawks in Europe. They are betraying their history. And we are at a tragic point in our history, because I don't think I'm slandering them or telling a lie when I say that today we have the worst, the most incompetent crop of leaders that we have had in Europe for generations. Incompetent, opportunistic, reckless, ignorant of their history, carried along by events rather than shaping them. They even have the audacity to try and claim and hijack feminism with a bit of girl washing in the military-industrial complex. So we have Ursula and Madame Baerbock and all of the girls over across the road, these cruise missile feminists who are an insult to the peace movement and an insult to feminism. Shame on them. Women have always been to the forefront of the peace movement and the backbone of it, and we will not have our struggle hijacked by these fakes and cronies. So look at these career politicians, you know who you are. In fairness, God help Germany, you do seem to have a rather large portion of these types, but these career politicians installed by patronage and money, whom every advantage has been given to, these are people who simply do not comprehend how frightening and horrific war can be. It's not their sons and daughters on the front line. It's not their sons and daughters hiding and in fear of persecution for the right to not serve, for the right not to kill a fellow human being. They don't understand that, so they're happy to ignore what's going on. So we are here to say that we are the antidote to their madness. We're here to say, not in our name. You will not prevail. Because war is never stopped by war. War can only be stopped by peace. And out of the tragedy that we see in Ukraine and in Gaza, the people of Europe and the people of the world are awakening to the horror of war in a manner in which they haven't been in years. They have seen through the scam like never before. This is an exercise in laundering money out of the public purse into the coffers of the arms industry for their own private profit. That's all it is, all it's about. So we're here as one to pledge every bone in our body to fight for peace, to fight for diplomacy, to fight for international law and an end to the conflict. We are the power that will shape the future. We are the ones who will stop the madness that's going on the other side of this city and in corners of the globe. We will together build a real world of peace and security based on meeting the needs of people and tackling climate change for an end to the military-industrial complex.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. That was quite inspiring. We've got our work cut out for us. We will take 10 minutes or maybe 15 of audience questions now for Claire specifically, and then we'll open it up to the panel and also the audience. And I hear Olga Karach is coming back as well, which I'm very pleased to hear. Unfortunately, I'll just have to take the first question myself because it's such a fraught issue. Claire, you said that a genocide is taking place or might be taking place in Gaza, and the ICJ certainly seems to think that it's plausible that it is taking place. As I understand it, a crucial part of deciding whether a genocide is taking place or not is proving intent to commit genocide. Could you please explain what you believe is the evidence for this intent to commit genocide in Gaza?
Sure. I think the South Africans put it best, really, in their case that they presented to the ICJ, where part of their submission contained 84 pages of direct quotes from Israeli President, the Prime Minister, minister after minister, leading military official after military official, and then translating that to the acts of those carried out based on the, I suppose, demonisation of Palestinians. There were calls for them to be saying we're fighting human animals, there are no innocent civilians in Gaza, everyone is a target, we want to clear Gaza. So 84 pages of quote after quote. And if you listen to the judgment from the ICJ, they took that very, very seriously. That was what they placed the strongest, I suppose, part of their ruling on. So, look, as you say, the case is yet to be heard in full. And it's utterly tragic that what the court asked has been actually ignored since then, because they stress so much about the need to protect humanitarian aid, to allow unimpeded humanitarian aid, and yet we have that situation being disrupted regularly as well. So, look, the court will decide, but I think people looking on and listening to the words coming from so many Israeli officials, they would look at the Genocide Convention and say, well, seems very like it to me.
All right, thank you. Okay. We will be taking questions now. As I said before, Sie können gerne auch Fragen auf Deutsch.
You can also ask your questions in German. We will translate them.
There. Maria? Yes, yes. Oh, and Olga Karach is back.
Yay.
Naja, ich sag's mir auf Deutsch.
Well, I would like to ask in German. You said that the Israeli side is responsible for the genocide. I would rather call it a massacre. Let's keep it at that. This is true, but it's only true if you add that there are several parties. Hamas also bears responsibility for this massacre. It's not only one side. Both sides are responsible, even if it's not a symmetric war.
Das ist Ihre Meinung. Das war nicht wirklich eine Frage, das schätze ich. Aber was ich daraus sagen würde, ist offensichtlich, ich unterstütze Hamas mit Sicherheit nicht. Ich bin auf der Seite auch auf unschuldiger Israelis. Und ich bin immer auf der Seite aller unschuldigen Zivilisten, aber eine Tatsache ist, dass zum Beispiel, dass sich keine Hamas-Anhänger in der Westbank befindet und dort sind hunderte Palästinenser von Israelis getötet worden seit dem 7. Oktober und es wird als Ausrede verwendet, um 30.000 Zivilisten, 17% von den 17% Frauen und Kinder sind im Gazastreifen zu töten und die niemandem was getan haben. Und das ist ein Ausmaß, und zwar in einem Gebiet, das ein offenes Gefängnis ist, das von Israel betrieben wird und verwaltet wird. Und es gibt nichts dergleichen in diesem Ausmaß. Das ist eine eigene Liga, ehrlich gesagt. Und ja, danke für die Frage und danke auch für die Antwort. Ich denke, es ist wirklich wichtig in diesem Zusammenhang zu betonen, dass wir nicht hier sind, um irgendjemands Seiten zu ergreifen, sondern um diesen Irrsinn zu stoppen. Ich schätze eine Sache, die ich noch sagen würde dazu, und das ist ein Zeichen dafür, dass das ganze Narrativ sich in diesem Gebiet verändert hat. In den 75 Jahren seit der Existenz des Staates Israel hat es Angriffe auf Palästinenser gegeben, durch Siedler oder durch den israelischen Staat. Und die Europäische Union hat immer noch einen Waffenstillstand gerufen. Aber das tun sie nicht, jetzt nicht, wo es wirklich viel, viel, viel schlimmer ist als die ganze Zeit. 1982, nach dem israelischen Krieg im Libanon, hat Margaret Thatcher, die wahrscheinlich eine der pro-israelischsten britischen Premierministerinnen war und sehr gut mit Israel befreundet war, da wurde ein Waffenembargo gegen Israel durchgesetzt, um sie dazu zu bringen, dass der Krieg beendet wird. Also ich möchte hier keinen Staat kritisieren. Ich möchte auf das internationale Recht pochen. Und das kann man sich nicht aussuchen, welchen Teil davon man braucht und für sich verwenden kann. Entweder alles oder nichts. Und das ist es geht nicht darum, irgendjemands Seite zu ergreifen. Es gibt eine Frage dort hinten.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in German. My English is not very good and I prefer to stick to German. In my opinion, it feels very good of what you said and how much energy you put into it and how much passion you put into your call for peace and to your call to stand as one. You do not see this in the German press. Here in Germany, an atmosphere has been created against pacifism, against negotiations. The moment you promote negotiations, how can you carry this passion, this background knowledge, and how can we transport this into the German media, that it's not only a few people, but that it's 20, 80, 100,000 people who take the streets for peace?
Das ist wirklich eine gute Frage. Ich muss Ihnen sagen, es ist nicht nur die deutsche Presse, die irische Presse ist genauso schlimm. Ich bin eine Putin-Strohmann, ich bin unglaublich, was ich mache. Und dieses Mantra, das wird immer weiter fortgeschrieben, regelmäßig, auch in Irland. Aber die Leute haben das durchschaut. Und wir haben immer davor gewarnt, was in der Ukraine stattfinden würde. Das ist jetzt eingetreten und jetzt ist es da. Und den Leuten fällt es jetzt vor die Schuppen von den Augen. Und es wird klar, dass das Geschlachte immer weitergeht an unschuldigen Menschen. Und die Menschen beschauen es jetzt. Und ich denke, darauf müssen wir aufbauen. Jeden Tag werden wir von Menschen aus der ganzen Welt kontaktiert. Und das geht so seit dem Krieg in der Ukraine. Und ich schätze mich sehr glücklich, dass es eine Plattform gibt in der Europäischen Union, die ich nutzen kann, dafür mit diesen Menschen in Kontakt zu treten. Und auch im Hinblick auf den Ukraine-War, aber auch im Hinblick auf den Gazakrieg haben mich unheimlich viele Menschen kontaktiert und die sagen alle, wir fühlen uns diesem politischen System völlig entfremdet. Die Menschen, die da an der Macht sind, repräsentieren uns nicht. Und also was wir tun müssen, das ist mehr von dem, was wir sowieso tun, weil dass die Menschen auch an ihrer Moral gepackt werden. Und für Frieden einzutreten, ist nicht einfach. Also man hat mir gesagt, ich würde Peaceman-Politik betreiben, weil ich da Frieden haben will. Selbst die Menschen, die Frieden blockieren, die sind diejenigen, die sogar Putin dazu gebracht haben, dass er noch mehr Territorium an sich reißen konnte und so weiter. Ich denke, wir müssen mehr Veranstaltungen wie diese durchführen, auch wenn die Medien jetzt nicht so groß daran teilnehmen. Also ich sollte eigentlich auch über die europäischen Wahlen sprechen. Ich weiß nicht, ob ich wiedergewählt werde. Ich hoffe, ich denke, manche in Irland werden dafür sorgen wollen, dass es nicht der Fall ist, aber da werden sicherlich dann auch andere sein, die auch diesen Standpunkt vertreten, wie zum Beispiel Michael. Und auf jeden Fall, wir nehmen es nicht leicht, aber die deutschen Grünen, da sieht es ganz anders. Und was Ursula von der Leyen angeht, das ist ja nicht Deutschland und gerade Deutschland, was so eine tolle Geschichte hat, des Pazifismus, der Friedensbewegung und so weiter. Also die sind doch nicht repräsentiert durch Ursula von der Leyen. Und wir brauchen junge Leute, die da weiterhelfen. Gut, es gibt noch mindestens 3 weitere Fragen. Einmal hier, einmal da und dort. Ich denke, wir nehmen diese 3 und dann werden Sie darüber informieren, was nachher stattfindet und lassen das Plenum ein bisschen miteinander diskutieren. Und wir gehen dann über zu Michael. Und also, weil ich muss einfach. Also erstmal die ersten 3 Fragen. Ich denke, die
Actually, it's two questions I'd like to ask, especially to the two women. And saying yes to GEAS, we also said yes to a fence around Europe. What does it mean for the conscientious objectors coming from Belarus? Do they need to go to special camps at the EU border, to welcome camps?
Ja, wenn diese Menschen dann in der EU ankommen, dann müssen sie in die Flüchtlingslager. Aber das ist nicht unbedingt das Problem, sondern wenn sie sich um politisches Asyl bewerben oder irgendeine Art humanitäres Visa, dann bekommen sie es nicht. Und diese Entscheidung
government, Polish government, etc., to return them back. Now we have the case of a Belarusian deserter in Lithuania who was fleeing through the forest illegally because he didn't want to take part in the war, and so his request for political asylum is denied now, and he can be deported back. And Lithuanian Migration Office says that it's okay for him to be to return back. But for desertion, I want to repeat, in Belarus, it's death penalty. So you should imagine how it's dangerous. The same case in Armenia, Belarusian conscientious objector is imprisoned now, and the Armenian government want to return him back. I know that such kind of cases about Russian conscientious objectors here in Germany, and this is very common situation. That they don't receive any legislation status.
Thank you. Okay, next question over here.
Ja, ich habe eine.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question which I feel is very, very important to me, very urgent to me. It's about Israel and Gaza. I can imagine that neither Israel, that you cannot expect Israel to find a peaceful solution. Neither can Hamas. To me, it appears that one factor that's completely missing is what's the attitude in the world. And there are so many men and women. Can it really be that they need to be locked in Gaza and have to accept it? Well, having a court sentence is nice, but don't we have to see them as war refugees and give them the status and give them a chance to move away from this area? Is not the whole world to blame for it?
Well, nice answer in that question. I mean, there is absolutely a role for the international community. I mean, the massacre that we are seeing, we will use that word, but the massacre that is unfolding, even now as we're here, would have stopped. It would have stopped months ago if it hadn't been for the US and EU and British support. I mean, all Biden has to do is pick up the phone and it would stop and a ceasefire would be there. So the international community bears a huge responsibility in this. They have relied on, I suppose, Israel in that area as a sort of a destabilising effect in the Middle East. Biden himself, when he was in, I think when he was Vice President, said that if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to invent it, so we can have instability in that area. So there is absolutely international complicity involved in this, and there needs to be an international response. I think when we were in the ICJ on the opening day with the South African case, and it was really poignant because this was post-apartheid, only 30 years of the state, and the South Africans made the point that in their history the people of Israel and the people of South Africa had both experienced great suffering throughout their history. But the way forward to end that suffering is to deal with that and to sit down collectively and sort out and share their future. I mean, to me, I don't think the idea of a two-state solution is a viable one. That's my own opinion. I think there should be one state where equal rights are respected for all people, and I think that is a better way forward. But that cannot happen, you're told, cannot happen unless the entire international community gets behind that, as they did with South Africa, because that's what happened. The whole world got behind it. And, you know, when you think about the terrible things that are happening over there now, and you think 30 years isn't a long time, and I'm not saying South Africa is perfect, but it's come such a long way in that time, and it's dealt with such a tragic history through truth and reconciliation, through all of that, reparations, right to return, all of these things need to be addressed. There's no way Israel and Palestine could sort that out on its own, that's for sure. But that's why we need an international system, which sadly at the moment is not really broken. Yeah, it's broken. It's not been up to the task, but it's on a lifeline at this stage. It's on a thread, and if that goes, what else have we got? Nothing. We've got the US rules-based international order, which is might is right, and that was always their ideology. But now, if this continues, it'll be their modus operandi everywhere else as well. They won't even have the fig leaf of it. So,
Right. Thank you, Claire. I would now like to open the floor for questions to all of the panel, and I would also like to encourage you to discuss these questions amongst yourselves if you feel like you'd like to give some input. Now, first of all, though, I would like that person who asked the question that we failed to address earlier to once again, I think it's that gentleman over here, Johanna. Johanna, sorry, Johanna. Yeah. If you could come back here. Yeah. We need to. Oh.
This lady had a question long ago.
No problem. We can address her question right after this one. But so many people approached me and asked me to please repeat that last question that Michael didn't get to respond to. So it's this gentleman over here. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, dass ich.
Thank you very much for mentioning that again. It's me. I'm looking for a perspective of the United Nations, of the General Secretary of the United Nations. If we mention the UN Charter, and the text really touches our hearts, but the decisive thing is, what do we do with it? And why don't we hear anything from the General Secretary of the United Nations? Why doesn't he become active? A few meters from here, he's at the International Security Conference, and I really would expect more initiatives. And you wrote a very comprehensive report where you showed a perspective how the conflict in Ukraine could be solved. And that's my question. Where's the perspective? Which path can be taken via the United Nations? I'd like to end here. I think the question is based on a misunderstanding of what the United Nations is. It's an organization of members of all states. 5 states claim more rights than all the others. This means the permanent members. Today we know that 4 out of these 5 members now break the UN Charter, have already broken the UN Charter, and these 4 countries who actually should be the guardians, the protectors of the United Nations, don't fulfill this purpose. And this is why it doesn't work. UN General Secretary is a chief administrative officer, and the only right he has is to call the Security Council to express his worry about certain wars or security events. And he doesn't have a vote in the Security Council. This is even aggravated by the fact that there is no fixed budget. It's voluntary. It needs to rely on voluntary contributions from the member countries, and this means there's also a way to block things in a financial way. So it's an extremely weak organization. And if you say we shouldn't rely on UNO, human rights are not international law. At that time it was decided that it's only a declaration. That's a fact. And because Russia would not have accepted that, there is a moral value to stick to that. And if the majority of the members wants it, the United Nations can become active. But if one or even more of these 5 countries blocks it, it will not happen. It's simply impossible. It's not like a European Union with money. It's contributions. Of course, he can make a statement, but he does not have any competence for decisions. If I lead such a mission, then it's a mandate by the Security Council. The 15 countries in the Security Council have to come to an agreement what needs to be done in Sierra Leone, not the General Secretary. That's just simply a fact. Thank you for your explanations. May I add something? The whole international structure of international law is based on the fact that we want it. It's not like national law where we have a police that we can call. It doesn't exist. There is this court of justice, but it's more a symbol because you cannot execute the decisions. And finally, the decisive factor is if we want it, and I'm calling to all of you, we must want it. If we say the UN is not important, this will not work. We have to convince the Russians, we have to convince the Chinese that there is something, that there is a body, an agency which has a perspective, which shows us a way out. And unfortunately, this has been lost.
Said the question in German, since it was posted in German, but to facilitate. Sorry?
Habe ich Englisch geantwortet?
Nee, es war Deutsch.
So.
I just wanted to ask you to facilitate discussion on the panel as well. Maybe we might just stick to English from now on. No, you don't mind? Okay, it's all fine. Okay, then please, Claire and or Olga, if you want to add to that at all, feel free.
He's the UN expert. How could we couldn't.
Right.
Well, I couldn't anyway.
Okay. There's 2 questions.
You're not.
I'm told from the audience. Yes, please.
Hier schon lange.
Bitte. Ja.
Ja, meine Frage schließt auch.
Now, my question follows the previous question. All the time we talk, nobody has mentioned the anti-nuclear weapons treaty. We see this treaty was a very weak one, but still it was pushed through by a coalition of NGOs, widespread NGOs in many countries, and countries without nuclear power, and which always had been pushed down by the Big Five. Well, still, it reached the level of international law. Wouldn't this treaty be a good way? I'm sorry. Personally, I do not think so. This is a very, very old, and this Non-Proliferation Act several countries have become nuclear powers in the meantime. Nobody prevented them from becoming that. And again, it's based on the idea that it's in the best interest of all nations that we have as few nuclear weapons as possible. And it's the way we talk, and such a treaty simply is not implemented. And, pardon? Ich weiß nicht. Sorry, I can't hear that. Well, I do not think that this Non-Proliferation Act would have any effect at the moment. Countries with nuclear weapons will not stick to it, will not respect it. The relationship between the nations is a hard one. They do not consider moral issues and humanitarian issues. I saw many wars, and these things are not subject of the talks. It's all these regulations are far too soft. You cannot negotiate. It's not that I like it, but that's just the way it is. Mrs. Daly, could you answer this question too, please?
At a crossroads in some ways in terms of world relations, that a lot of these international organizations which grew up in the post-war period after the world had experienced a Second World War, and then we were into the Cold War where there was a balance between two great powers and all the rest of it. And then we had the emergence of all of these international treaties which were supposed to regulate this race. The world now is one where US empire is in decline. Yeah. And that is shaping everything that's going on at the moment, because it was when it was in its ascendancy that those treaties kind of came into being. For me, it's a very dangerous period, because it's a bit like the last bite of a dying snake is its most dangerous. But I do think the hegemony is collapsing, but it will not just fall and go away. It's a very dangerous period. But at the same time, we do see an alternative multipolar world emerging out of that, where around the dominance of the dollar, the ability of the US to impose sanctions, which is that 60% of the people in danger of poverty around and in need of humanitarian aid are in countries which are sanctioned. That ability has been undermined now by the development of the BRICS, an alternative to the dollar and all of that kind of thing. So I think there'll be the basis in that. I mean, to me, I often say it when African people get in touch, I'm pinning great hopes on the people of Africa, who have a young population who are sick of being colonised as they were in the past. They're demanding to take their place on the world stage as equals. And we see in the Ukraine war, 80% of the population of the world were in countries which didn't go along with the NATO-US line on the war in Ukraine. So I suppose it's a convoluted answer, but I think new international structures will emerge out of the failure of the old ones. And we're at that dangerous juncture now. There's a huge interest in the redevelopment of the kind of non-aligned movement now in countries like Africa, even in some of the Balkan countries and that as well, to sort of say, no, we don't want any part in this sort of rampant militarization. So I think we'll struggle to find new structures and new treaties, but at the moment it's very difficult to see that happening, you know. But that's what we need to fight for.
Antworten sind wahrscheinlich.
Well, our answers differ because we have lived in different phases of life. I spent many years in war countries, and if you want to achieve something, it's extremely important to be realistic. Most politicians you negotiate with in principle are criminals, but still you need to talk to them. And maybe you are right, but things like nuclear non-proliferation, I do not think that's not realistic at all. And I do not think that this would be a means of avoiding a war. I think we need to start with acknowledging the charter that we do not lead war but negotiate. Then all the other problems would be solved. I think we're getting lost in too many segments because we will lose support in so many candidates. This is a German thing. It would not be a topic for discussion, and they are 90% of our world's population. Not unfortunately, it's just a fact.
Please, we'll take one more question, and then I would like to pose a question just to get Olga in on the discussion again. So we'll take that question. Yes,
yeah,
please.
And then afterwards, at least, I don't know, I'm
sure there's loads of questions. We'll just take one at a time. Thank you.
Ja, etwas allgemeiner. Ich war kürzlich in Osnabrück.
Now a more general question. I visited Osnabrück, the town hall, where the Westphalian peace was negotiated and signed between Münster and Osnabrück, ending the 30-year war. At that time, representatives from all states, districts, and church territories sometimes even met in different places because they did not want to sit at one table. They negotiated a compromise. It was maybe not absolutely fair, but they ended in a peace. Don't you think such a conference would be a good idea, where you collect everybody involved, all the leaders of the world, and try to find a solution, any solution? As Clare has emphasized, we are faced with challenges if and we cannot afford to quarrel if we want to save our world from disaster.
I think it sort of ties in with the points that Michael was making. I mean, if you look at the US, for example, they spend 10 times as much on militarization as they do in investing in diplomacy, investing in sitting down and talking to people as the only ways of sort of ending conflict. It's the only way in which we can go forward. So I think an initiative like that would be excellent. But I suppose we have to step back a bit as well and look and see, okay, how do you become president in the US? Well, you need a potload of money. You need about $2 billion. And the people who give you that $2 billion tend to come from the big companies, many of them the big arms companies. And I find that what's happening in Europe now is something very similar. We know the US system is totally dysfunctional. It's not even a semblance of democracy, of two lunatics, really, and the people generally cut off. But European politics is becoming more like that, because what Ursula von der Leyen has been trying to do, she's an unelected civil servant, and she really made a power grab, if you like, a sort of a coup to assume responsibilities for foreign affairs matters that she has no legal right to speak on behalf of the union or anybody for that. But she did it, and she got away with doing it. And what she is preparing to do, and what Europe is preparing to do, is to take more power from the member states and give it into the hands of this Brussels bureaucracy, we'll call them, who are more divorced from the people, but who are absolutely bamboozled morning, noon and night by the big lobbyists, big agri, big pharma, the military-industrial complex. They're all there. There are 65,000 registered lobbyists in Brussels alone, and they're the ones who are official. 65,000. This is where policy is decided, and that's what you're kind of up against. So how do you break that economic dominance by people who are making a lot of money out of war and death from them? That can only be done by organising people, and by people collectively coming together. By, unions need to do a lot more. But I think you're totally right. Every single section of society, and for me, there is great hope in those non-aligned countries in the global south who have looked on and who don't want to replicate that. Because sometimes when we hear things and we read our newspapers, they're very anglicised, they're very white, like they're very US empire and Europe, the old former colonial countries of Europe. But that's not what the majority of the world is now, and the majority of the world thinks very differently. And I do think we need to engage all of those people as a way of taking society forward now at this juncture of climate change. And that is probably a bit of a long-winded answer, but I mean, I think what you're saying is right, but how we get to that point is probably not easy, but it absolutely has to be organised and developed towards, and can only be done bottom up.
Thank you. I know there's loads of questions. I hate to just need to ask one question because I'm so glad that Olga is back. Olga, you alluded in your speech to the consequences of militarization, of militarism for women. Could you explain what's behind that? What is the gender dynamic that's baked into militarization that has such grave consequences for women?
Yes, this is very good question, because the militarization has a lot of impact for our struggle for gender equality and, of course, for the women's rights. We have a lot of invisible problems now in our region. For example, we have increasing of domestic violence in the families. I call the families like families of heroes, families of former soldiers and families of former political prisoners in Belarus. So on one hand, the man who was in the war or who was in a prison, of course, he is recognized as a hero. And on the other hand, he has very deep post-traumatic syndrome, and for the wife and for the family, it's absolutely disaster. They cannot manage anything with him, and even they cannot speak loudly about the problems, because the society could be strongly against such kind of women if she says that, okay, I'm beaten my husband, and my husband is former political prisoner or former soldier, you know, and so this is very invisible but huge problem now. And also, of course, we see the shrinking space for anybody who is not the man with weapons on hands. For example, LGBT activists, for feminists, for conscientious objectors, for we have only right role model, a very patriarchal role model, and I cannot understand how we return back so quickly. This is the family where the wife has to make some kind of inspiration for the man, and the man is going to the war, and nothing more. And this is like only one right model of family, and other role models are not accepted by the society. And this is also very interesting how everything is developed.
Thank you. All right, please.
Now, I would like to pose a question to Mr. Schulenburg. You started an initiative together with Mr. Funke, and can you tell me how far you got with your initiative, about the development of your initiative? You think this peace concept, well, in principle, it's dead. As the situation has in Ukraine has drastically changed. At this point, it would have been possible. Today, it's no longer possible. This peace it's no longer possible to do this peace concept as it was suggested. Mr. Kuyat and Mr. Brand and Hajo Funke wrote that, and I continued and elaborated on it, and which stages there would be. But of course, this was a time-relevant proposal. At that time, there was an equilibrium of powers, and now, obviously, Russia is prevailing in a military sense, and now the realities are quite different. Thank you very much for your interesting contributions. I would like to ask a question on profits. Clare Daly has already made it quite clear who has an interest in these wars. In a nutshell, we talk of the industrial capacity. I would like to ask about the acquisition of land. Is it true that the American multinational Monsanto already has acquired a lot of land in Ukraine, and some years ago this wouldn't have been possible for foreigners to buy land? I cannot confirm this, but I read it too.
More land having been bought up by vulture funds and investment funds and external foreign investors, mainly from the US, but probably Europe as well, than has been taken by the Russians militarily. So Ukraine as
really?
No, and like the laws were forced to be changed, whereby exactly as you say, previously foreigners couldn't come in and buy like that, but now it's been basically changed in order to facilitate that happening in a way in which small operators in Ukraine themselves wouldn't be able to do that. So it's utterly devastating. We have at the moment 50 billion of your money and our money, but partly in grants, partly in loans, which will be crippling for the Ukrainian people to supposedly rebuild Ukraine now when the war is still going on. So that basically they're going to put public money in. 33 billion is loans, I think, and 17% grants to rebuild something that's going to be destroyed. It's just like a conveyor belt of money going around in circles all the time, because while they're given 50 billion to reconstruct, they're going to, in March, agree to give another 5 billion per year in arms going to Ukraine, on top of, as I said earlier, in 2 years, 133 billion euros in direct payments to Ukraine, financial, humanitarian, but mainly military. The whole EU budget for 1 year is 186 billion. So you can see what this means for the people who are making a lot of money out of it. It's off the charts, the scale of it. It's phenomenal.
It's quite extraordinary. I'll have to look that out. I'm not saying I'm doubting what you're saying. It's just that the sheer amount of land if that has been bought up must be like, it's just incredible. So that's something to look into, definitely.
Especially where the money is.
Where the money is coming from.
No, what's been done with the money.
And where it's going.
I mean,
they're losing the war.
Yeah, I mean, our own Court of Auditors, so the European Court of Auditors, which administers and scrutinises how beneficial European public money is being spent, even before Russia's invasion, had done a study on Ukraine. And because for years the EU had been funding Ukraine, and they found phenomenal levels of corruption. Like, they could not say that the money had been well spent or where a lot of that money had gone. And of course we know that since the war has started, it's been absolutely exploded. A lot of people have been sacked for corruption and so on. But I'd say once one person is sacked, another person comes in, there's no control over it. There's arms that are being sold to Ukraine that are appearing for sale on the dark web, that are turning up on streets in Brussels probably. You know, there'll be blowback here. Somebody is going to get killed somewhere in a European city, or by a bomb or an arms that was given to Ukraine, when they never even took the serial numbers off them as to where these guns were going. They literally dropped them on the street and said, come on, take what you want. Where are all those arms gone now? Half of them, they don't know where they are.
All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm really sorry to say that we're coming to the end of this evening, at least. We'll take one more question, and I'm sorry to all of you who don't get to pose any questions tonight, but this is not the end of the Friedenskonferenz, the Peace Conference. We will have workshops tomorrow morning, as I said, and another evening event tomorrow night. First, we'll take one more question, then I'd ask you for just brief closing statements, and then I and Maria will send you off. Okay, Johanna, please.
There's one question I'd like to ask. Two. One question refers to the peace accord of Istanbul, which did not materialize. And I listened to a 2-hour interview with Putin, and he clearly stated that he clearly referred to this peace accord of Istanbul, and he sees it as a clear point to get back to the idea of this accord. And of course, it's important that nobody loses the faces, because it's much time and many deaths later if they resort back to this peace accord. Do you see any chances that this peace accord might be reactivated, and how could the Western world avoid to lose the faith if they come back to this peace accord? The second question refers to the UN. You clearly stated that the UN needs a reform or might be reformed. Of course, this question is too detailed to be answered, but could you give us a few cornerstones of which might be important changes to make UN effective? All the questions to me. Well, the negotiation position, of course, as somebody who is very practical in these matters, a very dry answer. At the moment, the only person who is in a position to negotiate in this war is Putin. The only party in a position to negotiate is Putin, because he's got the upper hand. Biden cannot negotiate because he would admit that he has lost the war he had wanted to win. And as we are expecting the elections, he will be very, very careful not to expose himself to further criticism. For the Europeans, who should do that? Von der Leyen? Well, no, they can't. And we see we no longer have the German-French alliance, and Zelensky of Ukraine cannot negotiate because this will cost his life. I guess that Zelensky won't be in power so long, and afterwards there will be negotiations with Russia without any Western participation. That's the most probable scenario. And I say this, it may be speculation, but based on experience, what has happened in was there are no niceties there. You have people negotiating who do not get along with each other, who would rather love to shoot each other. And there's only one basis for decisions: which interests can be balanced in which way. No other factors will apply. I could very well imagine that we will see some movement there, because Ukraine is in no position to start any offensive anymore. This is dry analysis. Are negotiations possible or not? It is more mathematical, and I just published an article on that. Of course, I'm used to not talk about this, your inner feelings. If you want to try and get people to negotiate, to talk to each other, no way that good intentions are involved there. I'm sorry for that. I've seen terrible suffering, terrible wars. You will hardly be able to imagine, but I've lived through so many wars. You need to be like a calm surgeon who cannot show you any emotions. You need to talk who's in power and who can make the chance. You cannot say, I favor this one or I can't stand that one. And this will be the case here too. May I point to the second question of the UN changes? There are so many reforms. Of course, the Security Council will not be reformed. We see the British and France, and now there are small powers in the world. We need another setup, and this won't be simple, but the real problem of UNO with the Security Council is that the Charter has been written exclusively for wars between nations. This was the thinking at that time, but today 90% of all military conflicts are within nations, and there is no regulation, not in the UN Charter, nowhere else. Suddenly a state fights a non-state actor. This may be a criminal organization, these might be other actors. It's a completely different part of the story, and in Ukraine we see an exception that we have two states fighting. Since World War II we mainly have conflicts within nations, causing a high number of deaths and a huge number of refugees. And it could also happen in Europe, that we might have armed conflicts within Europe. And it's a conflict of interest, a conflict of wealth, of power, who makes the decisions. But the dynamics of interstate conflicts is so different from war between nations. The UN Charter, in the form of preventing wars among nations, it has been extremely successful, with only a few exceptions in Ukraine, and we basically haven't seen any wars between states. It does not mean that states intervene on the part of certain actors, but we do, for example, Serbia was a war, but it's minimal if you look at statistics. There are statistics by the Oslo Peace Institute. It's a long name, I don't remember it. But you can upload it. It's really, really interesting. In principle, after the Ukrainian war, we talk about, which is partly an interstate conflict, we will be talking about completely different types of conflicts.
I would now like to ask you for very brief closing statements, starting perhaps with Olga, Michael, and then Claire. And then we, as I said, we will send you off. Olga, please go first.
I see a lot of risk of escalation in our region now because on one hand, Belarus can be involved. On the other hand, people start to speak about the new escalation with the countries of NATO and some kind of attacks for Baltic countries, etc., etc. We have the war now more than 2 years. And we see that the war is not stopped and continued, and more countries and nations are involved. So let's see together, as never as before, we need strong peace society. I understand that peace society now is under very serious attacks everywhere in any country, but without peace activities, without peace movement, we cannot achieve the peace, and this is my strong believing. Thank you very much, and let's be together.
Well, now I will surprise you. The reason for agreeing to be a candidate for the European Parliament, all considerations towards peace need to happen on the left side of the political spectrum, not on the right side. You may correct me. I think the coming Parliament of the Britain will drift to the right. And a lot of parties like Germany's AfD or the FPÖ in Austria say peace should not be combined with racism. Peace cannot be combined with nationalism. Peace must be international. There's no war who changes the income in the favor of high. If you just look at the cars of the Ukrainians, we need to rescue peace onto the left side of the political spectrum.
I've been 40 years active in politics, and I've learned that I don't really have the answers to anything, and that really all I can do is ask the right questions. And what I want to say is that for me, having been in the European Parliament now for 5 years, I don't know if I'll make it back. We'll do our very best. But if I do, it will be an absolute pleasure to have Michael there. And I cannot overstate the significance and the impact that it would have, that coming from Germany, Europe's strongest economy, well, it was before they sanctioned themselves out of it and gave that gift to Russia. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot, but in any case, the EU's strongest economy and biggest, most important one in so many ways, to have a voice of internationalism, of peace, of linking in the campaign against militarism with the battle to save the planet, all of those issues, it will be transformative because we haven't had it. It would change things. So that is your task, because politicians don't generally change things. Ordinary people change things, organised from below. And having Michael and others there to use that platform would be a great beacon forward. It would make the difference and the gap to the countless people that contact me from Germany saying all of the politicians in Germany are terrible. I wish there was people like you there, but there are people like me there, like you. All of you people in the audience are like me. So all of us have to be ambassadors and campaigners for peace and anti-militarism, wherever that is, in our workplace, in our school, in our parliament. It doesn't really matter. We got to get out there, because that's the message that resonates with people, with their lives, with their lived experience. And that is the only message that can save humanity. So you have a big task, but there's a gang of people who might make it a little bit easier a bit soon. So
no election campaign here, yeah?
Go on. No,
I was going to say that.
Go for it. Okay, well, it's not an election, but look, I can just say it would be an important voice. I've no political stake in the German elections. I'm an independent. So anybody who I would operate in a group with, it would be as a colleague, not as a party colleague. I'm not in a political party, so I have no skin in this game at all. I don't know Michael. I've met him at 2 or 3 peace events. So I go on his record and what he's done and what I've read that he said. It's not in any way, I didn't want to be seen to be endorsing any.
No, don't worry. It's really, it's fine.
Anyway, thank you very much. We'll see you all on the march tomorrow.
See it again.
Thank you all. Thank you all so very much. I will now hand over to my colleague Maria Feckel to hand over some parting gifts and close out the event. That's it from me. Good night. And Maria, please send us off. Thank you.